Stay with us now as we meet Margaret Ward, Mary McAuliffe and Sinead McCool, three of Ireland's leading feminist historians, to explore the life and career of Jennie Wyse Power, one of the most important yet little-known figures in modern Irish history.
Welcome to In Focus, where we delve into the life and career of activist, entrepreneur and politician Jennie Wyse Power. This project began life as a panel discussion for the 2020 festival, but like so many things in this past year, it was postponed and moved online. So, in true lockdown style, I sat down for a Zoom chat with three of Ireland's leading feminist historians to discuss this fascinating life story. Dr. Margaret Ward is Honorary Senior Lecturer in History at Queen's University Belfast. Dr. Mary McAuliffe, Assistant Professor and Lecturer in Gender Studies at UCD, and Dr. Sinead McCool, Author and Curator at the Jackie Clark Collection in Mayo. All three women have written extensively about this period and have been involved in many of the events of the decade of centenaries.
With so many of the women, the Civil War is a cause of great heartache for so many of them. Well, for so many people in Ireland, but particularly the women. And it caused a lot of soul searching, a lot of intense negotiation and debates. And in the end, Jennie does decide to support the pro-treaty side, mainly as she sees it as a stepping stone or a pathway. And I just wanted to quote from the speech she gave at the formation of Cumann na Saoirse. This is at the Cumann na Mán, or a meeting to consider the treaty. And she said, in the present crisis, it is right and proper that Irish women should publicly declare their allegiance to the Free State. It is also important that they should have an organisation to represent their interests. This is the meeting of Cumann na Saoirse. And she said an idea had gone abroad that all the women were against the treaty. And that they are not against the treaty. And she believed then that women of Irish nationality need not be ashamed or afraid to go to them in that organisation, that they believed that through the treaty and through the Parliament of the nation that would be set up, they would get freedom quicker than through any other means. So she is very much supportive, once again, which seems to be a facet of her entire life. Once she decides on a principled course of action, she follows it through, she thinks it through, and then she comes to a decision on what her particular standpoint is going to be with, and she commits herself to that. She wasn't the only leading member of Cumann na Mán who was pro-treaty, and there are descriptions of I suppose it's hard to see it not as a very sad time for the Cumann na Mán organisation when they're voting on the treaty, and Jennie and the few others who are anti or were pro-treaty leave then Cumann na Mán, an organisation they had been in from the very beginning, that they committed their lives to in many ways, that they had seen build from a very small organisation to the heights of its campaigns during the War of Independence. And she's replaced as president by Countess Markievicz, her friend, although she managed to retain some of the friendships with the anti-treaty women. But she goes on then to form Cumann na Saoirse with her friends who were pro-treaty. And again, very much in the pattern of her life. Here she is in another organisation that is dedicated to the cause she has decided she's going to put her energies into. And Cumann na Saoirse is very important for the pro-treaty, both the general election on the treaty, but also in helping in the early months of the Civil War and in that first year of the Irish Free State. They do a lot of fundraising, but more importantly, it's propaganda. It's about propaganda, putting around pro-treaty propaganda, and they do that very effectively. There is that bitterness, of course, because, of course, they're also involved in preventing their erstwhile comrades in Cumann na Mán being as important a part of the irregular side on that side of the Civil War. At this stage, the Irish Free State and the National Army in particularly would have been very aware of the effectiveness of Cumann na Mán in carrying a guerrilla war forward during the Civil War. So Cumann needed to be sidelined in many ways. And we can see that in the hundreds that are arrested and are imprisoned during the Civil War. And Cumann na Saoirse are involved in that. They're involved in spying on their former comrades. They're also involved in prison, in keeping an eye on them in prison. And there's one infamous time during the when women were being transferred from Kilmainham jail to the North Dublin Union, and there is a riot in Kilmainham by the anti-treaty Cumann because several of the women are still on hunger strike and they don't want to leave Kilmainham jail, and they basically have a brawl with the Cumann na Saoirse women, whom they call Cumann na Searchers. And there's real antagonism and violence between the two groups of women during that occasion. And then on other occasions, there's evidence that they are actually hunting Cumann na Saoirse women out of places around the country where the Cumann na Saoirse women are active. And there's real bitterness there. So I think we also have to revisit the Civil War as not just a brother against brother, but we see sister against sister here. And in many ways, one would consider this probably one of the hard times in Jennie Wyse Power's life. She's had a lot of tragedy in her life, personally and politically, but it must have been really, really difficult for her as a founder member of Cumann.
Some people have said that Jennie's views were kind of partly because of her friendship with Arthur Griffith. Now, I wouldn't like to be saying that because that's as if she can't make up her own mind. But on the other hand, Michael Collins, who she must have got to know quite well as well, because he would have been in and out of Henry Street when they had the IRA headquarters there, must have talked. So he had that dual thing about, supporting the treaty, but at the same time arming the IRA in the north and trying to eventually dismantle partition. So I'm interested in as to whether or not Jennie ever knew of a possible wider strategy. Therefore, in that sense, the acceptance of the treaty would be more of a stepping stone than actually appeared to people, because partition was such a sort of terrible blow to accept. Nancy at this stage, she seems to have been fairly neutral on the treaty or uncomfortable with it. She certainly wasn't pro-treaty. And in fact, she's really now out of the country. She'd gone back to Germany at one stage around, I think, 1919 and finished off, I think, to get her doctorate. And then she's part of setting up the Irish External Affairs, Foreign Affairs in Germany, because she's a fluent German speaker. So, you don't see mother and daughter there working together now, and Nancy is not in Cumann. She kind of sidesteps it. But it's interesting that Jennie's immediate reaction to something always seems to be to form an organisation to further her aims. So we've now accepted the treaty. What are we going to do? We can't be Cumann anymore, so we'll be Cumann na Saoirse.
And she's when she writes about it, she writes with regret. She said she regrets the splendid force of women to be the first body to repudiate the national parliament and initiate a policy which has such disastrous results. And then she goes on to sort of say that she was going to prophesize that the history will lay the blame for much of the present warfare on the shoulders of the women who in December 1921 cried traitor to those who believed that the treaty afforded a surer path to freedom than the fanatical civil war that followed. So I think when she talks about, when we talk about her in terms of her sort of the rejection of the military, again, you come in here, the purely military organization, that it's become as she sees, a narrower organization. But I think, as we've described over and over again in this particular sort of talk, is that it was a rift between friends. I think with Nancy, she did actually take a job when she came back in the new Irish Free State within the structure of the civil service. One of the few women actually to get in at that particular point. So they did align themselves to this establishment of the Irish Free State.
but not without like so many others feeling that it was far from what they had hoped for and worked for all those years.
Yeah, she's one of the women selected by the president to serve in the Senate, and she does do that from 1922 to 1936, and she is. It's interesting. She's in there initially with Alice Stopford Green and the Countess Deshart, who had been an anti-suffrage campaigner, and then joined by Kathleen Clark, Kathleen Brown, and Eileen Costello. So it's interesting that, Clark, of course, is anti-treaty. They had been comrades. They'd known each other. As somebody had said earlier, that Kathleen Clark actually paid compliment to Jennie Wyse Power. And they do collaborate throughout their career as senators in the Irish Free State Senate. And I've done some study on what the women senators are doing through the lens of looking at the anti-women legislation that was passed between 22 and 36, culminating in the 1937 Constitution with the Women in the Home articles, and the responses of the Irish Free State senators. And you can see that four of them, Jennie Wyse Power, Kathleen Clark, Eileen Costello, and Kathleen Brown, were constantly battling against both Cumann na Gael and Fianna Fáil about the things like the Juries Acts, the Conditions of Employment Acts, the Civil Servants Amendment Act, all these different acts, including the passage of the marriage bar, that were introduced to chip away at the civic, political, and work life of women in the Irish Free State. And the Oireachtas debates are very revealing of the standpoints that the senators are taking, including Jennie Wyse Power. And she and Kathleen Clark particularly are so vocal on women's rights throughout of this period. And this is their main standpoint. You can see they are fighting for the rights of women and the rights of women workers particularly, and the right of women to participate in the public realm, to have that equal citizenship. And they hark back to the proclamation of 1916 again and again and again in those Oireachtas or in those Seanad debates, and in public platforms and in discussions in the newspapers. And then they end up campaigning together against the 1937 Constitution and reuniting in many ways with many of the old comrades, including ones they'd split from during the treaty debates. Because, of course, now they have a common enemy, which is a patriarchal, traditionalist, conservative state, which is going hand in hand with the church and its construct of what it means to be an ideal Irish woman, mother, marriage, motherhood, and the domestic. And for somebody like Jennie Wyse Power, who was married and was a mother, but certainly never spent much time in the domestic and had spent her life as a public persona. This was very contrary to the Ireland she'd fought for and had committed herself to as a feminist. And she spends that latter end of her career continuing those campaigns.
I think it's very interesting that when she speaks against the women's exclusion from juries in 1927, she says that she regretted that the civic spirit that's developing in women is going to be arrested by women's exclusion. And I think if you were wanting to have a subheading for Jennie Wyse Power's life, it is that sort of civic patriot, that she comes back again, and she actually uses the word civic herself. But she also then extraordinarily becomes somebody again who seems to be in opposition to the state. So in 1929, her house gets raided twice because there's a woman in her employment that the Cumann na Gael government are interested in. So again, she's not seen as particularly part of the establishment at all, extraordinarily, given, that she starts off by being, selected to the Senate, etc. But she, that feminism of hers really comes to the fore when she sees, as Mary has said, the patriarchal state that is being constructed in front of her. It must have been devastating for her and Kathleen Clark, coming from the hopes of the proclamation to the reality of the 1930s.
Mm-hmm. And she does leave Cumann na Gael and becomes an independent senator for a while, and then goes into Fianna Fáil. But she isn't she isn't that impressed with De Valera either, nor are any of the women, and that comes to fruition, of course, then when he writes the Constitution, and you have those women in the home articles that really, I think it's the straw that breaks the camel's back for many of these women, and they see this is the proclamation had promised equality. The 22 Constitution had amplified that and had written that into it, and now in 37, basically, women are being told that constitutionally their position is within the home. And the nation needs them to be within the home. And not only that, but to be mothers because of that juxtaposition of the word woman and mother, but a particular type of mother, of course, mother within marriage. And so it's one of the last campaigns that Jennie Wyse Power, who starts with the Ladies' Land League, ends up campaigning against the 1937 Constitution. And in that long life, as Margaret said, it's very much about a commitment to equality, to civic politics, to Irish freedom, to cultural nationalism, but a woman who kept true, I think. I think if you look over Jennie's long life in politics, she's one person who keeps true to herself and to her own belief system and to her commitment to the causes that she started off with as a young woman.
I think that when we think about sort of a summing up of a life, it must have been very difficult at the end of her life, it's sort of, in her late 70s, to see what was almost like a lot of what she had worked for eroded in the Irish state, and her belief in how the Irish would rule themselves and we'd make a better a country for Irish people, to look after the poor and all of that, and all Irish industry and all those things that she believed in. She had seen a difficult 1930s and a difficult look at all these political parties. I think what's interesting about her is her changing, like the fact that she changes. She doesn't stick to the one path. She's still trying to look for a way through to find a solution. So she was the solution driven, and I think an intellectual powerhouse, a very, very admirable role model for women of today, both in politics and in public activism. I think we're in a wonderful period of women's history. I think there's such an amount of interest and activity and related artwork and dramatization, and where the stories of women are sort of going into the realm, not only just in sort of the educational spheres. And so I think that if something came of this event, and that somebody was going to do something, a song, poetry, or dramatization, or something that sort of celebrates her, I think that would be timely, and I think that would be great, and I think that a lot of people could identify with her story, but maybe not the amounts of work that she did. When I listen to her story, I just feel like I feel so inadequate. I just feel like, what have I done? Oh my Lord, what a life, But I suppose as historians, we strive to write about the people that really do inspire us and lead us.
As a feminist as well as a historian, it's interesting to see a life of a woman committed to the free, fighting for the rights of women, but also understanding that here was a woman who continued right up towards the end, who understood that the backlash can come and that you have to continue to fight against that as well. So I think there's also lessons to be learned for feminist activism and those who are fighting for women's equality from understanding the lives of women like Jennie Wyse Power. And that's why, we need biographies, we need the women like Jennie to be written back into the history books. And as Sinead said, this is happening more and more, and it needs to continue happening more and more. And luckily, lots of people seem to be very interested in these women. and it is continuing to happen as these archives open up, where Jennie's papers may be lost, but we can read her through other archives that are coming online and newer archives that are being digitized and made available and things like that. So yeah, I mean, a fantastic woman, fantastic story, and somebody we need to celebrate and commemorate.
The decade of centenaries, in a sense, has been looking at suffrage. It's been looking at women's roles, say, in the Easter Rising. We've had women in the War of Independence. We've got somebody whose political career, spans all of this, takes in all of these different movements. And we're finding out more, as Mary says, as the archives are opened up. And I think that one of the things that's really important is to see a woman who also had a family, whose family became very much part of the national struggle as well, who talks to her children about the past. I mean, they knew as much about it as her. I mean, she kept that continuity going, and we've seen how she involved all of her family and kind of nurtured people. She had an enormous nurturing instinct as well, whether that was suffragettes in jail or insurgents in the GPO. She was there as somebody who was political, but also somebody who cared for people. And I think that's an admirable quality, so that as feminist historians, we're not essentializing women and saying that's what women are about, but we are saying that women can use that role or subvert that role and it be a revolutionary act as well.
There ends our discussion on the amazing life and career of Jennie Wyse Power. Thank you to Margaret Ward, Mary McAuliffe and Sinead McCool for a most enlightening discussion. I'm sure we can all agree that Jennie was indeed a most formidable woman and a wonderful example of an active citizen fulfilling her civic duty. It is hard to imagine the sense of betrayal she must have felt at the end of her career, seeing all that she had worked for being eroded by the very people that she had worked alongside for so long. We will leave you with this quote from Jennie in the Shannon debate in 1925 on the Civil Service Regulation Bill. No men in a fight for freedom ever had such loyal cooperation from their women as the men who compose the present Executive Council. When they wanted messengers to go into dangerous places, they did not call on members of their own sex. When they wanted auditors to go out when the old local government board broke down, it was women they sent. It was women inspectors that went round through all the unions and did all the work for them in that terrible time when the whole British organisation practically ceased to operate. And these are the people who tell us that we are physically unfit? I regret that this has come from the men who were associated in the fight with women who played the part at a time when sex and money were not considerations.